Hello and Happy New Year. It's good to have all of you with us again for our lunchtime webinar series. I'm Kim Lutz, Executive Director for America's Watershed Initiative. AWI is a nonprofit organization that works across the entirety of the Mississippi River watershed. And we focus on two things. One is building knowledge about the watershed, and these lunchtime meetings are an outgrowth of our desire to present information on important watershed topics in a shorthand format. And we also work on collaboration across the watershed, trying to build shared goals and a shared partnership across the watershed to increase participation, funding, and action in key areas such as water quality, floods and droughts, fish and wildlife resources, inland navigation, and recreation. So we're really delighted to have Dr. Elliot Anderson with us today. Elliot is a research scientist affiliated with IIHR, Hydroscience and Engineering, a water center research institute at the University of Iowa. Before coming to the University of Iowa for graduate school, he worked professionally as a licensed engineer in Chicago on water resource and roadway projects. He completed his PhD in civil and environmental engineering and subsequently joined IIHR. And in his current role, he explores topics related to water quality and quantity in Iowa, focused on statistical hydrology, nutrient, and sediment transport. So we're just delighted to have you here, Elliot. Before Elliot starts, I just want to turn your attention. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A box. We use that instead of the chat to put questions for later in the presentation. So if you have questions for Elliot, please put them there. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Kim, and thank you for the opportunity to present at this webinar series. So what I'm going to talk about today is actually something I was working on as a bit of a side project for my day job over the past couple of years, and this was what we've called the Central Iowa Source Water Research Assessment, or CISWRA report. And so what we were trying to do with this project was really put together a first of its kind report that summarized the state of the rivers over in central Iowa. So I've got a quick map here on the right-hand side of my screen describing the two watersheds that we were interested in. For context, we were really focused on Polk County and the city of Des Moines. So many of you will probably have heard of Des Moines. It's the capital and the largest city within the state of Iowa. The Des Moines and Raccoon rivers, where they come together, their confluence forms the heart of downtown Des Moines. That's really why it was founded. And so rivers and water has always been a primary concern over in central Iowa and in Des Moines specifically. If you were to follow this map and take the Des Moines River as it goes downstream, you can see that it ultimately flows into the Mississippi River, and this takes place right at the southeastern corner of the state of Iowa. So these are two of the most important water bodies that we have within the state of Iowa because of the large populations that we serve. And so with this Central Iowa Source Water Research Assessment, what we were trying to do is document all of the current water quality and water quantity challenges that faces Polk County. And I have this map here, including in our watershed of analysis, the upper parts of the Des Moines and the Raccoon River, because as most of us are familiar with, water quality issues aren't always just centrally located. Water is very connected and doesn't necessarily follow political boundaries. And so some of the water quantity and quality issues that Des Moines faces is heavily linked into what's going on in the upstream parts of the watershed. With this project, we weren't just putting together a report to send to the public and send stakeholders. We also wanted to put together a list of suggested action steps. And so these action items were things that we identified that various stakeholder groups could do to address some of the challenges that we identified within the State of the Science report itself. Before jumping into some of our major findings, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to the great team that I was able to work alongside when I was putting this report together. You may see some familiar faces within the 16 science advisors that I've got shown here. And these are the core group of people that I worked with when assembling this report. I know Larry Weber might be familiar to some of you. I know he's been involved with AWI in the past, but we really had a great team here of folks affiliated with Iowa State University, the University of Iowa, where I work at, but also some folks affiliated with federal agencies such as Argonne National Laboratory or the U.S. Geological Survey. Um, the end products that we put together for CISWRA were really three documents that we sent out to the public. All of these are free and publicly available, and I'll have a link in a QR code where you can find all of this information at the end of the presentation here. But there were three core documents that we ended up producing as final deliverables. One was a technical scientific report. It was over 200 pages in total, and this was very systematically covering every single issue that we identified in the Polk County area. Because that is a longer and technical document, it's not really that reader-friendly or accessible to the layperson or the general public. So we synthesized a lot of that information and put together this document in the middle, which we termed Currents of Change. We actually worked with an engineering communication firm and a local graphic design team to build some nice graphics and make the report very aesthetically pleasing and condense a lot of that more technical language into a reader level that was more equivalent to middle school or high school. And so that was about 100 pages in total. And then finally, we had an executive summary. And so this was a document that was really highlighting the issues that we thought were most important and covering some of the basic background details as to why things are the way they are currently in central Iowa. Within this executive summary, as I mentioned, we have identified these 6 areas as what we think are plaguing water resources in Polk County the most currently. And I'd just like to put in a quick additional plug for this executive summary because I think it's a nice way of summarizing the current state of the rivers in a way that's very succinct and very accessible. And so we found some good use for this executive summary with getting people interested in water quality or water-related issues in central Iowa that are really just learning about this concept for the first time. So I think this has been a nice tool for bringing in people that don't really have much of a background, technical or otherwise, with regard to watershed-related work. And so with the rest of this presentation, I just wanted to jump into some of the key topics that we hit on when we were putting together the CISWRA report. With the job that we had, it was it was a very all-encompassing task to talk about every water quality issue that we had within central Iowa. And so much more information than I could hope to squeeze into a 30-minute webinar today. But I just want to go through some of the major things we talked about and got asked about the most as we were interacting with stakeholders when putting this together. And so probably the thing that dominated, probably the contaminant of concern that we got asked about the single most was nitrate. So when we're talking about nitrate, this is of course one of the dissolved forms that nitrogen takes when it enters a water body. Nitrogen, along with phosphorus, are nutrients that act as major pollutants throughout the Midwest. And a couple of points that we've tried to make when talking to the public about nitrate in central Iowa is that the levels of nitrate that we have in the stream nowadays are much, much higher than they were over 100 years ago under more natural conditions before the advent of European settlement in central Iowa. And we know that from the ecological theory that's been developed around nutrients and eutrophication. But we also know that from just being able to look at historical nitrate data that's been measured in central Iowa's major rivers. And so that's what the graph over here on the left is showing. They've actually measured nitrate over 100 years ago. And in every sample that they took, you average that together, you get a very, very low concentration, 0.8. They did another suite of sampling in the 40s and 50s. If you look at what the average nitrate concentration was in those samples, it was up to 2.2 milligrams per liter. And we see today that, it's much, much higher than that. If you look at over the past 30 or 40 years, we have concentrations that are well and truly above what they had in the natural condition. Another thing we wanted to do was put the nitrate levels that we see within the Des Moines area and the rest of Iowa within context into the entire nation. And so that's what we tried to do in the map over here on the right-hand side of the slide. This is from the years 2002 to 2017. The average nitrate concentration at a whole bunch of different rivers where the USGS went out and did some monitoring and some statistical modeling here. And unfortunately, Iowa sticks out like a bit of a sore thumb. The nutrient concentrations that we see, especially regarding nitrate in central Iowa and in Iowa more broadly, are unfortunately among the highest in the nation. I did want to include one screenshot of the report just so you can get a sense for how these things actually looked when we worked with a graphic design team that I mentioned. So these are a couple of infographics that we created summarizing some of the issues regarding nutrients. We see over here on the right-hand side of the slide that most of the nitrogen that is in the rivers of the Des Moines and the Raccoon comes from the agricultural sources that exist upstream. So we have a breakdown of about 40% fertilizer, 20% manure, 20% from fixation. So this is the nitrogen that's produced when soybeans or other legumes grow, and about 18% from atmospheric deposition. Point sources in Iowa are not a big contributor to the nitrogen problem that we have. Also have a couple of infographics here on the left in which we talked about tile drainage and how it has exacerbated the nitrate situation in Iowa. And then we came up with a couple of schemes for trying to make some of the load numbers that we see going through the Des Moines and Raccoon rivers more publicly accessible. And so if you do some of the math, you can see that we get an average of about 50,000 tons of nitrate going through the watersheds. They can vary quite a bit from year to year, but that's what the average has been over the past 10 years or so. That's the equivalent of about 25,000 nurse tanks of ammonia. So if you guys have ever been through a cornfield or a soybean field, and you can picture the cylindrical ammonia nurse tanks that are putting fertilizer on the watershed, that's what that's equivalent to. But then, of course, this also has a dollar amount that can be associated with it, because nutrients are, in theory, fertilizer that can be used to help crops grow. This is the equivalent of about $43 million fertilizer that gets lost every year that would be much better served helping our crops grow than acting as an ecological pollutant. Nitrate is also a big issue when it comes to the main water treatment plant that we've got in Des Moines, and that is called Des Moines Waterworks, and it's the largest water treatment utility within the state of Iowa. Nitrate is an issue for them because they have to legally ensure that nitrate in their finished drinking water that they send out to their providers is below 10 milligrams per liter, the federal maximum contamination limit. It's very often the case that nitrate exceeds this in the Des Moines and the Raccoon River, which they use as their primary surface water intakes. And in order to treat the water, they have a series of ion exchange vessels that they use to remove nitrate, and they'll also rely on blending from other sources. And so it becomes a complicated and expensive issue for the operators over at Des Moines Waterworks because they have to determine how much nitrate is in each one of their potential sources and determine when they need to turn their nitrate removal facilities on in order to bring the finished drinking water down they distribute to their customers to below that 10 milligrams per liter threshold. When they do run their nitrate removal facilities, they're really just doing it on days when nitrate is high and when they have to. And that's because it's expensive to run that equipment. And so you kind of end up with this counterintuitive situation where the nitrate that gets sent out to the customer base is actually higher on days when they're running their nitrate removal facility. We see that over the past 20 years, it's had an average of about 8 milligrams per liter. And that's compared to when they don't run the nitrate removal facilities, it's much lower. But that's because they're only running those facilities when they have to, when nitrate is really high at their surface water. And so Des Moines Waterworks has done a great job of ensuring that the water that they produce is under 10 milligrams per liter, but often they don't bring it down to much lower than that. So it's very routine for people in central Iowa to be exposed to nitrate in drinking water with concentrations of anywhere between 3 to 7 or 8 milligrams per liter. And this is pretty concerning because additional public health work has identified that there may be public health risks like increased cancer rate, thyroid disease, or increased risk of birth defects associated with long-term exposure to nitrate at levels around the concentrations that people are getting at Des Moines. So this has got a lot of people concerned over there, and has, I think it's fair to say, has been one of the major public health issues that's arisen over the past couple of decades. Another thing that we looked at quite a bit was this concept of manure management. So manure management is important because if manure can get into waterways uncontaminated, it has the potential to harm a bunch of different aspects of water quality. We've got some of those listed here on the top right-hand part of the stream. And the big point that I like to make here is that if we're able to manage manure successfully, we can handle a lot of these concerns all at once. So we can control some of the pathogens that enter the water. We can control the nutrient load. We can prevent harmful algal blooms and prevent some other emerging contaminants from entering our waters as well. A lot of manure gets produced within the Des Moines and the Raccoon River watershed. And this is primarily because in recent years, there's been a large takeoff with the hog industry that we've had in the state. So the amount of hogs in Iowa has risen from about 15 million to about 25 million over the past couple of years, or over the past couple of decades. And because of that, we have more manure now than we ever did before. But there's also been a consolidation of a lot of the farms that we have in Iowa. So it's much less common to have a few animals that are being pastured on a farm in a farm operation What's more common nowadays is to have these large concentrated animal feeding operations, thousands of animals under one operation. And when you have all those animals concentrated and you have all that manure in one place, storing it becomes a lot more difficult. And we just see with the figure over here on the left that the amount of hogs per operation within Iowa has really skyrocketed over the past 20 years, going from about 1,000 to about 4,000 within the recent couple of years. And in certain locations, manure has the potential to be a good fertilizer. But what we see in certain parts of Iowa is that we now have so much manure and it's so concentrated that the nutrients that are generated from that manure are more than we could ever use to grow crops. And so we have subwatersheds that have too much manure and just not enough crop ground to apply it safely. And then finally, I wanted to touch on some recreational issues that we identified within the report here. So when it comes to recreation, the major concern that we have within central Iowa is that there are pathogens that are out there in the water. And so when people enter the water, there are many, many potential benefits to that, just in terms of the physical and mental well-being. But there's also the risk of encountering pathogen and resulting in some sort of infection. And so we've done some work in the report going in and looking at the historical data and trying to just summarize how often different watersheds have exceeded different recreational thresholds. When it comes to pathogens, there are too many in the water for us to measure all the time. And so what's typically done is to measure a single bacteria strain, E. coli, and that gives us an indication of, roughly speaking, how safe the water is to go into. And so we've worked in the report to identify some of those concerns. The other big thing that concerns recreators is the influence of harmful algal blooms. So certain algal blooms can produce harmful toxins. When that happens, it can become quite dangerous for humans or animals or pets to go into the water. And so again, what we've done in this report is gone in and summarized how often at some of the major recreational beaches and lakes we have within Iowa, how often historically they've identified or they've exceeded the thresholds that are advisable to go into the beaches or not. So we have a summary of that over here on the left-hand part of the slide. One other thing that I thought was really interesting, and is not something I typically do in my normal research, is looking at fishing and how that was a very popular activity within the Des Moines area. We were able to work with the Iowa Department of Natural Resources and get some great angler survey data that they had collected. And so it all kind of pointed us in the direction that fishing is a very, very important activity to the community, and one that was of greater importance than I had previously thought. And because Polk County is the largest county within the state of Iowa, it's also the most frequently fished county. And if you go right to some of the major fishing locations downtown and you talk to those people, you find out that about half of them are using the fish that they collect there as an important food source for either themselves or their families. So I think it's fair to say that amongst that group, fishing is more than just a hobby or a pastime. It's an important way of life. Can also look at some of the demographic breakdown that we have between fishers that use the water bodies within urban areas of Iowa and the rest of the state. We see that when we look at that, the urban fishing community is much more diverse than we see throughout the rest of Iowa. So the statewide fishing community really reflects the demographics that we have within Iowa as a whole. But if you focus just on those urban areas, you see a lot of immigrant populations. Again, a base that's a lot more diverse than we see in other aspects of the state. And then I just think it's important to note, and we've done that in the figure here on the right, this shows the heart of the Des Moines River within downtown and the location of fishing license sales within 1 mile. And so it's very, very common to for people that live near these rivers in downtown to just walk over to these water bodies and go fishing and buy a license very, very close to where the stream is in and of itself. So last thing I wanted to touch on before I close is that within this report, as I mentioned at the beginning, we also identified suggested action steps. We tried to break those down into 3 groups here. So local and individual actions, regional and watershed actions, and statewide actions. And these are based on what's most applicable for the person or the agency that is trying to make some sort of positive change in the watershed here. And so additional details can be found for each of these 30 or so steps that we identified. And we just, again, wanted to provide a nice reference to people of clear, tangible things that can be done to improve some of the issues that we identified. So this is my last slide. Again, I'll just mention that everything I've shared within the documents or within the presentation here are available in the documents that are online. You can find those by following this QR code or by visiting the link that I've got here posted on the slide. So with that, I guess I'll turn things back over to Kim, and I'm happy to answer any questions for the rest of the webinar here.
Great. Thank you so much, Elliot. Great overview. Uh, Thank you for covering that so succinctly because I know there is a ton of information in these reports. While people are getting their questions into the Q&A box, I'll just start with one of my own to lead off. Of all the findings, what did you find that was totally unexpected in this body of research?
I think probably the fishing portion that I talked about at the end was the most unexpected for me, just as someone that's not that much of an outdoorsman, not that much of a fisherman myself, just seeing what an important role it played within the community over in Des Moines was something that I guess caught me off guard slightly. I typically had this image of people fishing on rural ponds or rural streams in Iowa, and that definitely does happen. But doing this report, doing this work, really taught me not to overlook the value and the importance of urban fisheries as an important water resources issue in Iowa.
Well, super. There's a question that just came in that is related is it says, it seems like you may be suggesting that fish may be a problem to eat. Is that correct? What data supports this? And do nitrate levels impact safety of fish for consumption?
So I'll answer the last part of that first. No, nitrate does not impact the issue of fish. It doesn't bioaccumulate in animals like it does for some other like some other contaminants possibly do. So the nitrate issue does not affect the safety of fish to eat, but it can impact the ecosystems that make it harder for fish to actually thrive. So our suggestions about whether or not fish are safe to eat, unfortunately, this is something we don't have a lot of great data on. There are recommendations that the IDNR has provided about maximum limits on the amount of fish you would want to ingest. So the biggest issue that we've had in Iowa is mercury accumulation within some of these fish. It's not a huge issue. It's not a huge public health concern unless you're consuming quite a bit more fish than the average person would. So generally, we say you don't have to worry too much about the fish you're consuming based on our current state of knowledge. But again, the Iowa Department of Natural Resources and some of the public health agencies over in Iowa have some specific guidelines on maximum limits that they would recommend.
Great, thank you. Another question relative, you mentioned that there were actions at a variety of levels, and given the interest in the whole watershed, can you give us a few of the recommendations that would pertain to the watershed as a whole?
Yeah, so I'll just jump back one slide here so I can show people how we broke this up again. One of the biggest maybe the biggest recommendation we had for the watershed as a whole was trying to bring all of the existing data that's been collected under one roof, under one hub. One of the challenges that we faced when doing this project was we had to pull data from so many different disparate databases. And I'm not sure there's really anyone in central Iowa who knows 100% what data exists for every single water quality issue that's out there. So one of the recommendations we had was trying to get all of these groups together and form a comprehensive water quality monitoring plan. So everyone is up to speed with what data is out there, what other people are doing, and what can be learned from that data.
Great, thank you. Another question, this is around the reception from the ag communities upstream from Des Moines. How has this information facilitated conversations between the Central Iowa Water Authority and rural communities?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'll be the first to admit I'm probably not the person on the team out of the 16 advisors that's the best at answering that. We have other people that work a lot more hand in hand with some of the upstream rural communities. But I'd say overall, a lot of the findings that we had in this report with regard to what the influence of agriculture was on water quality have been known about for several decades. I don't think we produced anything that really caught anyone that off guard from that perspective. But I will say that I think some of suggested action steps that we've put together here, it covers a variety of different issues. So we're very clear in the report to say that not everything, not every water quality issue that we have here requires the work of farmers to implement or to have make a tangible difference downstream. But at the same, on the other hand, farmers have a big role to play with certain pollutants that we identified, and so it's led to some really good discussions with the watershed management authority groups that are higher up in the watersheds, and I think foster some good conversations with those. But as far as tangibly what's happened since we've produced the report, not the best person to answer what's been happening over in Central Iowa with regards to that.
So kind of a follow-up question to that. Um, my understanding is that the interest in this report has, while, as you said, these water quality issues in Iowa have been known for some time, but the response in terms of how many people came to hear the presentation or presentations about this work have been quite large. And I'm wondering how you and the others on your team feel that this report maybe has tapped into some additional interest in this issue for the state of Iowa, or would you say it has? And if so, how might that impact implementation steps?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that it has, that it's raised public awareness of of these issues to a significant degree. One of the things that happened was we released these reports this past summer, and that was right in the middle of a really bad nitrate episode that was hitting Des Moines, really all of Iowa, and so the timing was there. The timing with the release, coincided with these issues making their way into the news from another perspective. And so I think that got people maybe more interested in the topic than it would have otherwise. I think maybe the biggest thing that's been useful about this report to the general public is even though some of these issues have been well known for a while, I think we did a decent job of trying to bring what's a complicated issue and what touches on a bunch of different topics into one document and bringing all of these different topics related to water quality under one roof. And so having a resource for people to approach all of these things concisely and consistently, I think has been the biggest help from a public engagement standpoint.
Terrific. And final question for today. I know there are probably many solutions you all have recommended in the document. Can you share with us, two or three that you think are particularly promising to address this challenging issue?
Yeah, I'll talk about one local one and one statewide one, just really briefly. One of the things that our research turned up when diving into the scientific literature was just the importance of bringing in the local community for water quality monitoring. So there's this concept out there of citizen science or community-based science, and that's helpful for getting a bunch of different water quality data points that we might not have otherwise. But doing things like that just increase public engagement quite a bit. So trying to get the public involved with river cleanups or water quality monitoring is something that can actually help quite a lot just for getting more people politically motivated for these issues. One other thing, a more specific item here that I'll talk about at the statewide level, it's really hard to track where manure has historically been implemented in Iowa. A lot of the manure management plans that agricultural producers use have not been digitized or available in any sort of geospatial database. So one thing we recommended at a statewide level was for the Iowa government to step in and work with the Iowa Department of Natural Resources to produce a geospatial database so that we can better track where manure is being applied to the landscape. So I think those were two examples that stand out to me as being particularly useful.
Super. Well, thanks so much, Elliot. Really enjoyed your presentation today. Again, if you have additional questions, this is how you can contact Elliot. We'll have this up on our website shortly. And again, thanks everyone for being here today. And hope you'll all tune in February when we'll be having a talk about a project that the Nature Conservancy has been involved with reconnection of a piece of the Illinois River. So thanks again and for participating, and hope we'll see you again soon.